My apologies, Mountaineer Nation. If you tuned into this video this morning and see me, this bright and shiny face, moving his mouth, but having no audio, no music, nothing coming. It wasn't anything incorrect with your speakers or your phone, anything like that. Unfortunately, I had some technical difficulties on my end, so now re-recording this for the second time. Having done it once already, I feel as if I can maybe do it better a second time. So thanks for tuning in for another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. I'm Carson Fox, and we are going to talk about Fall 26 football recruiting. West Virginia, over the course of the month of June, has had many weekend single day camps, 7-on-7s, big man camps. You know, June is camp season for the next year's and really 2 years recruiting cycles worth, maybe even 3 or 4 of events all around the campus or all around the country with many different universities, all levels for football. So West Virginia having completed their last one for the month of June this past weekend. West Virginia has now hauled in 16 commits during this month, bringing West Virginia's grand total to 22 commits. Sorry, a lot of tongue twisters already in this episode. So I think this is a good moment to kind of, a good checkpoint, debrief, recap. But I think that so far for this 2026 recruiting cycle is just kind of a microcosm of the big picture. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. So I might be jumping around different points as I seem to usually do when I make these videos. So I'm going to be talking about this class, but West Virginia football recruiting in particular. And what I really want to say, start off, is I just can't be thankful enough. I know I was very critical when West Virginia hired Rich Rodriguez back in December because of the, ill will and, vitriol that I still had harnessed for 17 years from the way 2007 happened. But this man and the staff that he has hired has not taken a day off, has not skipped a beat for 6 months straight. They have worked their tails off to bring in 74 newcomers for this Fall 25 team, and then be out there hot on the trail to all that they can get for this 2026 class. Wow. I am going to give these guys, this staff, some grace from the just sheer quantity of players that they're trying to evaluate, that they're trying to kind of get a feel for, while not necessarily having a complete feel on this year's roster. So with players who haven't even really, thrown on the pads for a first official team practice, you're trying to figure out your roster, project it for the foreseeable future, but at least, fall 25 and 26. And are any of these new transfer portal, JUCO commits that they have coming in over this summer or, have spent the spring season practicing with, how are they going to perform come fall Saturdays, this upcoming fall? And then how do you manage this roster with all of these recruits that you're trying to bring in for next year's class? So I know that there are a ton of players who are only 1-year guys on this fall 2025 team. I keep my fully color-coded roster here on my Excel spreadsheet, different colors indicating whether it's a transfer prospect, a JUCO, high school, players portaling out, or if they're just, a retaining player that's in the system. So this color coding is all over the place with this 2025 roster because of so many new additions to the team and so many players leaving. But looking ahead already for the 2026 roster, so this is as of today, June 25th, with all of the 1-year players who will be leaving after 2025, and assuming players who have extra ability will be coming back for 2026, West Virginia is at 96 players with these commits. So it's just, I feel like this is a really, really tough challenge. Really, I feel like good social experiment for all of college football. The most players that one program has brought in one cycle, and then you're trying to also plan ahead for the next year's roster, not knowing what you have. So it's just absolutely crazy right now. Where I will say big picture, looking at 22 commits, a national team recruiting ranking of 44th. Now I see, refreshing rivals for today dropped to 46th. That's the recruiting service that I tend to use most frequently and have since my days going back to high school. All of West Virginia's recruits being rated a 3-star prospect or lower. I do really like the spreading around of the roster spots and filling in areas of depth that will be needing a replacement come next season, given all of these one-year players that are on this roster. So 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end. Defensively, you're looking at an interior lineman, a bandit outside linebacker, 3 linebackers, middle linebackers, and 7 defensive backs. Whoa. So I am going to wait actually until come signing day to really break all of these individual athletes down. If you're looking for full analysis, breaking down film, all that kind of stuff, I'm going to direct you to my guy Mountaineer Paul on Locked On West Virginia. He does an amazing job. Seems like he's always on the scene, knowing exactly when these players are going to commit, and then has a full breakdown of their tape and stuff like immediately the same kind of day. So point you Mountaineer Paul's way on that regard, but I'm going to talk about it from a big picture, 40,000 standpoint view. And really now, almost 7 minutes into this video, my synopsis, my thesis is what I have been saying now for 6 months since Rich Rodriguez is hired, is if you are optimistic and are putting your faith in the adage that he's done it before, he'll do it again, and this program under Rodriguez, I like to say Rod and staff, like it's just kind of like one of those colloquialisms I feel like that can go with, instead of calling him, head coach Rich Rodriguez or Coach Rod, something like that, Coach Rod and staff. Almost lost my train of thought there. But the adage being that they are going to find those players who are diamonds in the rough, unheralded gems that other programs are going to look over, that they are going to identify, they are going to recruit, they are going to develop, they are going to train, and they are eventually going to produce on fall Saturdays, and some of them are going to have the privilege of moving on to the NFL. So, I was very highly critical of Neil Brown and the entire era. If you follow my channel, you've been a regular subscriber, you know that story. So a lot of things are going to kind of parallel in this video pertaining to recruiting, and we're going to kind of talk about the contrasting things that are going on in the program versus the Neil Brown era and today, and kind of trying to understand that. But Rodriguez, I would be disingenuous to say and be very critical of Rodriguez and his. Let me back up here. I would be disingenuous if you've already heard from me for years on end now that Neil Brown was identifying these players who were not Power 4 capable recruits and trying to get them in there, do the same kinds of things, develop them so that by years 3, 4, 5, they would be able to contribute as starters, but they're going to need at least 2 to 3 seasons or so to kind of marinate in his developmental program, a nutrition program, Mike Joseph's strength and conditioning, et cetera, and then say that same, and give the benefit of the doubt to Rodriguez because the same thing is happening with this recruiting class. And where I guess, I say I'm willing to wait and see on these kinds of things is, again, because he's done it before, back 20 years ago. Yeah, he's been able to do that. He was good in the recruiting trail at Michigan, got some studs at Arizona to have them, above, contending in the Pac-12 South division, then for a full Pac-12 championship. Then at Jacksonville State, the players that he found for these past 2 years teams. So that's because I look at some of these commitments and I'm looking at their other offers and I'm not so necessarily impressed. Now, I'm going to talk to you about what I like in some of these recruits and recruiting groups, but for right now, this on paper, this is going to be a recruiting class that falls into the 50s by the time all is said and done, unless West Virginia is able to pull out some big fish. Now, you might say, oh, Carson, star rankings don't necessarily matter. Who cares about national recruiting rankings and stuff like that? Well, let me tell you, I understand that isn't an exact science, but it's gotten better over the last 20 years as the competition between scout.com and rivals now on 3247 has become more and more competitive, and people just absolutely consume and eat this up in the similar way that NFL fans consume draft content, that college programs and fans care about recruiting. And that was the lifeblood of pre-transfer portal era in 2021. That was so much fun to follow that. You could almost pretty much guarantee that, who wins signing day or, who's consistently putting up classes for a 4-year cycle in the top 10 is going to end up being top 10 on the field or better. And unfortunately, just things have not progressed since Rich Rodriguez left town in the way that I would like, or things were trending I look at the recruiting rankings as of today, and I see a program like Rutgers, RU, who West Virginia pounded on in the Big East. They're top 25 in the country. They have 5 4-star commits. West Virginia hasn't had, unfortunately, 5 or more 4-star recruits in a recruiting class since 2010. I mean, the days of you look back and you think to yourself, oh man, Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey, that was now 13 years ago. Going back even further to Pat White, we're talking 18 years ago. Steve Slayton. And it's just unfortunately, after Bill Stewart really I think kept the gravy train going. Things were going in the right direction. The biggest still what if, beyond what if West Virginia won a national championship in 2007 would be also what if then West Virginia parlayed that into getting a commitment out of Terrell Pryor. Rich Rodriguez staying, building a national power. Who knows, maybe that keeps the Big East potentially together, or at least West Virginia is more of an attractive program in conference realignment. Instead, Stewart kept that going for as long as he possibly could, till West Virginia unfortunately had to, grab the closest lifeboat off the Titanic and being this Eastern Frontier program in a Western League in the Big 12. I think that the brand recognition and how West Virginia's reputation and brand could play in some of those Midwestern markets, coinciding with Dana Holgerson's really just off-the-wall recruiting strategy, in addition to him being extremely lazy and then being very self-defeatist once he got Will Grier in 2017 and pretty much quit recruiting. Then you get Neil Brown coming in and had, for the really first 2 years of his cycle, we're getting Troy-level recruits thinking that they could play at the Power 4 level. And that really not manifesting. Those first couple of classes, it was really couldn't have. I mean, of course, Zach Frazier being a one-off, Wyatt Milam being a one-off, but it wasn't really until that class of 2022, where you hit on C.J. Donaldson, you got Nico Marchiol, you got Rodney Gallagher, started to really build some momentum, built some inroads, set down some pipelines to powerhouse programs who want to come to your program for 7-on-7s over the summer in a Good Counsel in Maryland or in Ironton in Ohio, and get players like Reed Carrico to come to you. And that's what I'm saying. It took so long for Neil Brown to finally get some things in his staff in recruiting, and then it was just too little too late when you combine that with a very sloppy 2024 season. You don't win the backyard brawl, you don't contend for a Big 12 championship, you get run out of town in Lubbock in the season finale, and it just poof had to go. So I've always said, and I know transfer portal recruiting now changes some things, But I still would say that West Virginia, if it could be a better recruiting program, because of all the challenges that it faces nationally, with so much of the eastern population, so much competition there, powers to its northwest and northeast and Penn State and Ohio State, the number of in-state recruits being so small. Don Nealon said it best when, he said that really, it's a 6 to 8 hour radius of how you can recruit, and then, some pockets in the southeast. And that's changed. That those players don't necessarily want to play in the Big 12 conference, especially like 10, 15 years ago. At least the highest level, they want to go to the ACC, they want to go to the SEC, they want to go to the Big 10, not necessarily into the Big 12. And you got this Eastern school. So that's something that I don't think is necessarily talked about, and I think this is a proper time. But then just also, the competition is fierce. I talked about this even last summer, is that I wish that Neil Brown and his staff would have tried to find some tertiary markets out there that they could have been a little more risky, and not had to settle so much on, the recruits that will come to them to the summer camps. Now I know, I don't want to be hypocritical, because that's exactly what we're seeing out of Rodriguez and his staff in doing so. But, again, that was just a different time period to try and analyze those things. That just, I didn't like the direction where things were going up until it seemed like there was some momentum finally catching last summer for this upcoming graduating class. But poof, we've seen how that's all pretty much fallen apart. So, and a bigger question, I think I'll put a pin in that and come back to it. But I'll at least say what I do like about this class so far. So on paper, not necessarily, shining from that perspective, but there are some things that I really like about this class already. Watching some of the tape on some of these guys, reading some of the articles about their commitments, and learning more about their recruiting journeys. For one, I got 4 for you. One, I really like this Jet Walker. A kid who's 6'2", 210 coming into his senior year of high school. He's a horse. I think he will be a great complement, who might see the field sooner rather than later if his high school game can translate to the college game, because there are so many different smaller speed backs on this roster. You look at a Jaheim White, Cannon Katzer, Sincere Bowers, smaller guys who are trying to be burners. Ty Edwards only 1 year in Morgantown, so Jet Walker could come in and maybe see some early carries. And a guy who's already pushing upwards of the top 25 running backs in the country, according to ESPN.com. So love to see, love his build, love his makeup, a Texas product, choosing West Virginia. So first and foremost, like that starting off the bat. Also, the offensive line group is just nasty. They're big. I think they're looking for more athletic kind of, so not so big in a way of like more compact body. Still guys, I do love me some 300 plus pound defensive linemen. But so for my offensive linemen, knowing Coach Rodriguez's system, having watched it in my younger years, you want guys who are smart. You want guys who are agile. 7 seconds to spot the ball and get the snap from play to play. So you got to be able to pick up tempo, and you got to have the pace, and you got to be able to move. So if you're going to be a slow, lumbering lineman, you're not going to have 35 seconds of play clock pre-snap like you did under Neil Brown. So I'd rather have some of these guys, if they are coming in out of high school a little bit undersized, but they can move. I think that West Virginia will be able to, through its nutrition and strength and conditioning, work with those guys. And now I'm looking at the offensive line for 2026. The depth is being quickly repleted, backfill. So, 18 guys on next year's roster on the offensive line with eligibility. So I think with another year's worth of, transfer portal recruiting, that we're going to get back to a very stable, at least first and second string. So it only is going to take, I feel like, one full calendar year that West Virginia is looking at, okay, some guys that you can, look at and will play for 2026, 27, and I like where they're headed in that direction. If they even get another offensive line commit, get 5, I like that they already have 4. Also, I like these big defensive backs. It seems like all of West Virginia's defensive backs are about 6'2" or bigger, even at the cornerback position. So that's awesome to see. I love that, Seattle Seahawks, Legion of Boom, big kind of defensive backs. See this out of Alabama from time to time. Some of those other programs like Oklahoma State or even Pitt, who like to have press coverage on the outside with those big, long, get your arms on you kind of cornerbacks, but also guys who are just going to fly around to the ball. Whereas Neil Brown was, infatuated with just pure foot speed. What I'm noticing about this year's transfer portal recruiting class, so guys who we're going to see this fall, but also in 2026, are guys who just immediately close on the ball. That their eyes are moving. If they're not picking off the pass because they're watching the quarterback's eyes, they are laying the lumber to a wide receiver or tight end coming across the field. So I miss that. I miss the Quentin Andrews. I miss the Robert Sands. I miss Carl Joseph. I miss those kinds of players. That was, I feel like, just one of the detriments. Aubie Burks was admirable. Sean Mahoney, even got to give him a shout out for, he was a starter for how many seasons, but you just miss some of those enforcers in the secondary who just even, sometimes you can headhunt. Sometimes you're going to get a personal foul, you're going to get a pass interference, but if they're going out there and they're just being physical against teams, other wide receivers, we just haven't seen that for so long. So I really like what I'm seeing so far. And then fourth on my likes list, this Malachi Thompson, in-state recruit, big kid, 6'5", just under 200 pounds already. I think he's only 17 years old either. So my goodness, or 16 or 17 years old. So this kid, I think his best days are even ahead of him. The state's Randy Moss Award winner of this past season. So if he stays healthy, keep working on his footwork, speed, hands, all of that, then West Virginia might have found, again, off the beaten path, down there in Nitro, West Virginia. But and when I say off the beaten path, from other schools aren't necessarily on him just yet. So West Virginia pouncing at the right time, going and getting him. You got to be able to block. In Rich Rodriguez's system, you're going to have to be able to block. But looking at his last few years, and I'm going to talk about this in another video of what West Virginia or Rodriguez liked to do at Jacksonville State in the pass game, man, there's going to be some big play opportunities for Mr. Thompson if he continues in his development down the road. So that's what I liked. Some of the things that I have to talk about for this class, unfortunately, whereas this was a year of misses, already is. I know some things can change. Signing day, and what does signing day even mean anymore when players are able to get out of their, signees, get out of their commitments, even past signing day. So what does that even mean anymore? So I'd like to say oh man, everything will end come signing day in December, but we knew from this past cycle that necessarily doesn't mean a sure commitment. It is when you move in, it is when you are on the field come week 1. So obviously the big fish miss for this cycle, say that 3 times fast, is Chris Henry Jr. 5-star, 1 or 2 best wide receiver in the country. He's out there in Southern California, so not necessarily close to home here on the East Coast. West Virginia has been after him for years. You would have kind of hoped, and still kind of try and hold out hope that Pac-Man Jones, who is what I think his not godfather or something like that, would be in his ear, play for Coach Rodriguez, but he's multiple times shut down his recruitment. And I get it. You're playing for the defending now national champions. You're playing with Brian Hartline, who is already getting interviews for head coaching positions elsewhere. This is what Ohio State has now quickly become, just like Alabama and wide receiver U. So why wouldn't you want to go to Ohio State if you're a 5-star player wanting to win a national championship? The only thing West Virginia really can sell him is early playing time. So that's kind of where I was thinking, okay, there might be an opportunity, come his freshman season, but then maybe he'll, transfer up to an Ohio State later. That not necessarily being the case. And that is just one of the unfortunate things that West Virginia has not been able to during this transfer portal era, it's get some of these big fish recruits out of high school, and then because of recruits looking at them for immediate playing time. I thought that would have changed with the way that NIL is going and players not wanting to necessarily redshirt or truly develop, go to a place where I can get immediate playing time for the potential to transfer the next season, something like that. No, they're still going to the Blue Bloods in droves, unless they get counter offers that West Virginia just cannot match in that same kind of regard. So would have liked to see, and I would still, we'll hold out hope. Who knows? Maybe I just hope that the potential of being a legacy recruit, you would have liked that in Morgantown, obviously. And it's been 17 years since Noel Devine was West Virginia's only, and still has been West Virginia's only 5-star commitment of the online recruiting era, which goes back over now 25 years. So it's just my goodness. I mean, how many 5-star commits has Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, USC, Oregon, etc. had in the last 25 years? West Virginia only getting one? This is what I'm talking about. I understand that talent, that's what these recruiting websites are ranking their star rankings on, is pure talent. And there's more that goes into it, from the kids, grit, psychological development, mental fortitude, adjustment from home, work ethic. West Virginia is always going to pride itself on those players who are the underdogs, who are the overlooked, doubted, or just counted out players who then go out there and overachieve. Think back on so many of those greats during the Rodriguez era and others. A Dan Moses ends up being a Remington Award winner, best center in the country, who was a no-star to 2-star recruits out of Washington, Pennsylvania, and goes on to be one of the best, probably the best center. Right up there with Zach. I would give the edge to Moses. Best center in school history. Incredible offensive lineman. So that is where, but I would just wish that West Virginia could pair some of those players like that with once in a freaking while a 5-star or a few more 4-stars just to help out the cause. And that is just what's so defeating, is if West Virginia had one recruiting class the way Michigan recruits, or the one class the way, say, a Miami recruits, or a Texas, where would they be? And that is what is just so frustrating, is that we, as West Virginia fans by extension, have to work so hard to see any sort of kind of success when it's just it's so challenging across the nation. That's why I just try to be real with you all, is that has to change in so many different facets. Coaching salaries, West Virginia put in the investment into the facilities. Again, obviously recruiting is 50% or more of the battle. That's what's going to end up making the difference on fall Saturdays. And one of the things I think is making more sense would be in a conference in which there is more of a geographical, traditional rivalry fit. Because right now, Penn State is owning Pennsylvania. I don't know where West Virginia goes for some of this top talent if it's not grown in state. And now we're going to talk about some players that do have some statewide connections. West Virginia's missed on 3 of them, and there's one all still out there that I want to talk about. So the next one was very weird. Story broke, I think, early last week or so, of the nation number 1 ranked punter, 3-star prospect in Jimmy Gregg, Morgantown's own, choosing Syracuse over WVU. Came down to those two. And it was either in an article from Rivals' Keenan Cummings, or I'm sorry if I'm missing who actually wrote this article, that it just sounded as if West Virginia didn't try as hard as Syracuse to recruit him, or just he fell in love with the Syracuse atmosphere and felt loved in return, having a handshake with Coach Brown. I don't know if it was with Greg specifically, of just feeling so familiar already with Morgantown and West Virginia that, outside of the whole prospect, the football component to it, that he just wanted to explore somewhere else in the country, wanting to, test out Syracuse. But this one was just a head scratcher to me, because why are you leaving with WVU right there? Did he see it as some sort of 13th grade from like a school perspective and not wanting to just be right there? But how many highly rated, I don't care even if it's just a punter, players from your backyard, your town, you see this State College, Pennsylvania, they're going to Penn State, or if they're from, like how West Virginia's trying to make some inroads in the state of Tennessee. And man, it just seems like Tennessee, especially once Spire Sports got rolling there with NIL, that West Virginia couldn't pull any players out of the state of, Tennessee, or how hard they worked for Montaven Quisenberry out of Kentucky, getting his commitment initially and then losing him to the Wildcats. So it's like, man, how do you lose on a player so highly recruited? Again, don't care that it's a punter, right there from your own backyard. And the next, player I want to talk about, it's the separate sides of the same coin here. Very weird situations and some sort of, legacy or, already established connection are now Travis Johnson and LaRon Deuce. So West Virginia this past spring cut ties with TJ Johnson. As I said, I think since his signing day, I thought he was too slow to be a wide receiver, but too big, big but too slow, but then not big enough to play tight end. He was just a tweener. And, kind of bounced around, recruited as a tight end, then spent some time in the wide receiver room, and now third year in the system. Rodriguez just figured, sorry, we don't necessarily need you. We have better options. So West Virginia lets TJ Johnson walk. So you've now severed ties with the Johnson family, in a sense. So Torrey, having played for Rodriguez back in the mid-2000s, you can remember the weird tweet he had on signing day when TJ committed. But now you've lost out on Travis Johnson, his younger brother, who it sounds like is going to be ending up going to Michigan, but a 4-star wide receiver from the state of Virginia. Again, I don't know Travis's makeup. I don't know if, the recruiting services got it, right on him, but wrong on TJ, who is a 3-star commit. But, again, you miss out on a 4-star wide receiver commit whose dad played at West Virginia and whose brother was in the system for a couple of seasons ago. But so then on the opposite side of the coin, it's really disappointing when it works out in reverse that LaRon Deuce, Tyshawn Deuce's brother, who, again, didn't have the greatest of senior years down at Hurricane. I can remember from my, and looked at my notes from my signing day episode, and it looked like he was kind of outshined, at least statistically, by a teammate on that Hurricane team. Still has the speed and still was, one of the top recruits from the state of West Virginia. But we see how quickly West Virginia, Coach Rodriguez, let me get his exact name, so it don't sound like I'm trying to. Okay, so West Virginia signed another player who was one of Zaw Jackson out of Huntington, and pretty much said, Zaw, sorry, you're not good enough to make this roster. Zaw goes to Marshall instead. West Virginia keeps a Tyshawn Deuce, perhaps in hoping to play on that connection to get his younger brother LaRon to sign in Morgantown. Moved from Hurricane down to Texas to play in Sarasota, Florida for Cardinal Mooney, who I'm sure is like some sort of charter private school. He ends up committing instead to Indiana. Now, in his case in perspective, I'm wondering if this is some sort of infatuation with, the Big Ten and the perception, and this is where I'm going to start to really track this and walk. This might become part of a narrative of future videos that I talk about in terms of recruiting, is there now this perception of the Big Ten and SEC being the power two of college football that's, eventually looking to break away or getting preferred places to the college football playoff? just things of that nature. Is that a perception going to change? How will that impact some ACC programs? How will that impact some Big 12 programs? And of course the G6, but they don't get any, big recruits anyway. Even when you have like the greatest player in state history out of Idaho who didn't commit to Boise State. So in LaRon Dew's situation, choosing Indiana, how does that impact then Tyshawn for this upcoming summer? It's just weird, West Virginia it's almost like you would have liked to flip the situations. If you keep TJ to then get Travis, or you and cut Tyshawn because LaRon's going to Indiana, it's just very to miss on Henry Jr., to miss on those two guys who were 4 stars. Now Jimmy Gregg, the nation's #1 punter. Damn. And now there's one key commit I gotta talk about. Hasn't made his commitment just yet, but it's Deron Parks, another West Virginia native from Hurricane. Also transferred down this past offseason, and played for this Cardinal Mooney team down in Florida. He was the outstanding player, MVP at West Virginia's big man camp last season. Just like all signs point to, this is the kind of player that is transformational for your roster and getting your program off to a jump start. In the same way that Wyatt Milam was, or Zach Frazier was for West Virginia under Neil Brown, is the same way I can see this being, I feel like, for Rich Rodriguez. That's how important I feel like getting Deron Parks would be. But now, moving, does he think he's bigger than the state of West Virginia, trying to put himself out there on a national platform for this high school, looking at his official offers or visits for the last couple of, this month specifically, but into May even, it's littered with all of these SEC schools. So is another former West Virginia in-state kid who's moved out of state going to spurn West Virginia in the same way LaRon Dew's did and go to a school in the SEC? Like, it's hard, man. It's just hard. Like, I tell this to people, being a West Virginia fan is not for the faint of heart. That you are always going to have to dig and strive and cut against the grain, and there are a lot of outside forces, NCAA, Big 12 conference, that are not going to help you along the way. That you are just going to have to continue to be, push the rock up the hill for it to slowly fall back down on you, but you're still pushing and pushing, and that is the life of a Mountaineer fan. Because if you can't have some of these breaks, that you just think to yourself, if you're a Penn State, if you're a Notre Dame, you get those legacy commits. Any sort of a family kind of, connection there, man, that's always something the announcers talk about during those games, is the family connection there. So to not have any sort of hits in that area, and then to not be able to count on your own, in-state, when you pride yourself on that, a population of 1.8 million, and just, try and putting a fortress around the state in recruiting, to not be able to get those kids, it's just a little bit concerning. It's a little bit disappointing. If West Virginia can pull out this Javonte Smith, who has 3 schools from the SEC alongside West Virginia. I know he was supposed to commit yesterday, but's now pushed his commitment back. West Virginia can get him if they could get another guy like this Legend Bay, who I know would be West Virginia's second quarterback commit of this class, and you don't usually necessarily see that. And anymore, it just seems like it's one quarterback, having Jaron Hughley. But I like what I see out of Legend Bay's game. He's fast. I think he has as many rushing yards in his statistics of last year as he did passing yards. Looks like the kind of mold that fits the Rich Rodriguez system so well. So I'm going to take a pause there. Love to know your thoughts. Please leave them good, bad, or indifferent here on YouTube. If you've liked this video so far, please like it so more Mountaineer fans can see it across YouTube. Love to have you as a subscriber to my channel as we kind of go full-fledged here now with baseball season over into looking ahead to football. So I hope to bring you more football preview content as the summer unfolds. I think we'll kind of take a pause there on recruiting for just now in case something huge drops. And then, kind of focus more on this fall 25 team. But what have you thought of my thoughts, big picture, the impact of, all the outside forces in NIL, in the Power 2 SEC and Big Ten comparatively to the impact that I feel negatively draws on West Virginia being in this Big 12 conference, unless it reshifts. When, if the ACC implodes, some of those traditional rivals come over from the ACC to the Big 12, or what happens in conference realignment, and then West Virginia just not, me hoping that you could get some every once in a while 5-star talent to supplement all of these unsung heroes, hard workers that West Virginia gets, but just, man, it would just make the difference in one player here and there, that the big boys just get in droves, the Georgias, the Ohio States, the Texases. And it's just so disappointing in that regard. So I'm willing to wait and see. I'm giving Rodriguez the benefit of the doubt because he's done it before, and that's not the benefit of the doubt that I gave Neil Brown. So I understand that. And also understanding completely that this roster is so in flux right now of not knowing what you have necessarily, that you kind of just got to wait and see, understand that you're going to have some players who don't necessarily make it, transfer out next year, or they just don't produce on the field the way that you thought whenever you recruited them. Out of the transfer portal, out of the JUCO ranks, so on and so forth. So you're adding all these high school players in, thinking that they could come in there and fill out some depth pieces, or you feel so very strongly on the relationships that you've been able to establish for the last 6 months and they buy into it. And if West Virginia can stay competitive in this new revenue sharing post-house settlement world, and the money is equivalent kind of here and there with these other schools, what's going to make the biggest difference for West Virginia is winning, contending for conference championships, putting players into the NFL draft, things that Neil Brown and his staff should just not do enough of during their 6 seasons. That now just go out there and win, baby, and then all of these other things will start to take care of themselves more and more, I feel like, in the similar fashion that West Virginia did back, the early 2000s, and then it really started to pick up as West Virginia was contending for national, Big East championships, national championships, stuff like that. So, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hail West Virginia. Let's go spot the ball.